Well, good evening, everyone, especially those online who are live. I know we've got a couple of new people tonight, so a special welcome to you. I hope the virtual experience is as good as the real one. And welcome, of course, to you guys who are here with us in person. We come to our fourth lecture. It's actually the fifth session, but remember the first one was an introduction. So this is the fourth in our actual Bible overview lectures, looking at the books of Exodus through to Deuteronomy. So it's quite a big section, looking at Egypt, the time that the Israelites spent in Egypt, and then their wanderings around the wilderness. And it'll take us right up to the point where they're about to enter the Promised Land, which we'll pick up next week. I'm going to open in a word of prayer, and then we can get going. Well, Father, thank you for your word that brings light and revelation from you. It brings us into the light as well as it shines the light on Christ, and as we put our faith in Him. So we are drawn to you out of darkness and into your family. And we pray that as we come to your word tonight, that you would be our teacher, that you would help us to not only understand the themes and the purpose of these books, but also that that our lives would be transformed by your word, that we might be more pleasing to you and more Christ-like as we come under the rule and the authority of your word. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Right, so far in our overview, that's becoming quite a familiar table, I hope, really laying out the theme of God's people living in God's place, a place that God chooses for them, creates for them, enjoying relationship with God as they live under His rule, the rule of His word, as I've just prayed, because that's how you can judge someone's loyalty, whether they live under your rule or not. You can't say that you're a Christian, but you defy the word of Christ. You live in a way that's completely contrary to what the King says. You therefore don't live under His rule. You live in defiance of Him. So as you live under God's rule, so you will enjoy God's blessing. And we've seen how that has played itself out. Adam and Eve enjoyed rest as long as they obeyed God's word. And God's word to them was, do not eat of the tree in the middle of the garden. That was God's rule. That's all they had to do. But they rejected God, as we know so well. They lost God's land that He had given them, God's place. They lost Eden. They were expelled from the garden, driven out into the wild world beyond the wall that was around the garden. How do I know there was a wall around the garden? Well, there was an angel placed, do you remember, at the entrance to the garden. So there must have been some barrier, something delimiting the garden. Probably, I don't know what, wouldn't have been an electric fence, but I take it was some sort of wall of some sort with a place that the angel could stand. And they were subject to death. They were deeply affected by God's curse that was not on them, but that was on creation. So God's judgment landed on them, fell on them, but God's curse fell on creation. God almost couldn't bring Himself, do you remember, to curse this man and woman that were made in His image, but He curses everything else, the snake and everything else around them. In mercy, despite sin growing, God chose Abraham to bring about an Eden-like situation, or to bring back an Eden-like situation to His creation. He promises Abraham many descendants. He promises him a land to live in. He promises him rich blessings that he will enjoy. And all this comes as an unconditional promise. 5 times in those 3 verses in Genesis 12. 5 times God says, I will, I will, I will. And there are no strings attached. Abraham just got to believe me. If Abraham believed God, that would be the result. God would give him these things unconditionally. And God guarantees that through a covenant that God establishes with Abram and then confirms with Abram. And we've seen all that. Later, though, it's quite interesting. God introduces the element of obedience to this promise. Suddenly, there's conditions starting to be connected to this promise. So the promise comes to Abraham unconditionally, on the one hand, conditional, remember, only on God's faithfulness to keep the promise. Remember the animals split in half and God walks through between the animals, saying, kill me if I don't keep the promise. So on the one hand, this promise is only conditional on God's faithfulness. But on the other hand, if Abraham is not circumcised, and if the descendants of Abraham aren't circumcised, they will fall under God's judgment, and they won't enjoy the promise. So suddenly they've got to be obedient to a word that God has spoken to them, the word of circumcision. So we've spoken about this. Now there's this tension. How is God ever going to be able to keep the promise if it's conditional on human obedience when we are so bad at that? Okay. By the end of Genesis, as we evaluate all the promises that God has given, God has grown the descendants of Abraham to 70, despite much fighting among themselves, and despite the fact they're not yet in the promised land, they are being blessed by God. We see God protecting them, providing them, sustaining them through this time of terrible famine. Through Joseph, he provides Joseph as the savior figure, and he really is a Jesus figure in the Old Testament, probably the closest that I can think of to a savior of the world who's going to save the world from God's judgment is Joseph. The famine is a result of judgment. It always is. Famine is a sign of God's displeasure on his people. And here's a man who steps in and actually saves God's people from God's judgment. And he rises up, as we know, to being prime minister in Egypt. Right, that's the story so far. Now as we trace the story onwards through Exodus and to Deuteronomy, we'll see that there's a pattern that develops throughout these, not just chapters, but books of the Old Testament. So now we're taking huge chunks at a time. God's people are either static or they're traveling. And God deals with them on that basis. So when they're static, so we start out in Exodus with them static. They were in Egypt, they are slaves, stuck there, Exodus 1 to 12. Then from 13 to 18, they're traveling, and they travel to Sinai. Then from chapter 19 of Exodus all the way through to Numbers 10, they're static at Mount Sinai. Then from Numbers 10 through to Numbers 12, they're traveling, and they travel to Kadesh Barnea. Then in Numbers 13 to 20, they're static as they camp at Kadesh Barnea. Then in Numbers 20 to 21, they travel to Moab. And that takes 40 years to do that little trip. 40 years, it's covered in actually just one and a bit chapters. Spans 40 years all of a sudden. And then from Numbers 22 all the way through to Deuteronomy 34, they're static again in Moab as they look over the promised land. They're right on the brink of taking possession of the land. Now, here's the way God deals with them. Generally speaking, when they're static, God is giving them His law. They're receiving God's law at the times that they are camping. So God tells them to set up camp, and then God speaks through Moses to them. And then they pack up and they travel, and invariably, as they travel, they grumble. As they travel, they sin, they are disobedient, there's havoc while they're traveling, and then God will bring them to a standstill, and then He'll speak to them again and give them more revelation, give them more of His law through Moses. So we mustn't think that the law is just the Ten Commandments. The law is that, plus the whole body of laws, civil laws, ceremonial laws, religious laws, all sorts of laws that already is their constitution that God is giving Israel. How you should treat your neighbor, what you should do when there's a legal dispute, all of that stuff. It was all part of the law that God expects His people to keep. Remembering now there's an element of obedience that is expected of them. They're expected to keep God's law to show that they're living under God's rule. The minute they don't keep God's law, that shows they're not living under God's rule. They've been defiant, they've been disobedient, they've rejected the authority of God when they turned a blind eye to His word. So let's work through those various static traveling sections. The first one is this, from Exodus 1 through to 12. They are in Egypt, we learn. And Exodus chapter 1 links us back to Genesis chapter 50. Now you mustn't think that chronologically these two books back together. They don't. There's a huge time gap between the end of Genesis, remember 70 descendants of Abraham, and the start of Exodus. How many descendants? Well, Yeah, hundreds and hundreds. I mean, so much so that what happens in that first chapter, the Pharaoh wants to get rid of all the Israelites. So they've become so numerous that now they're a threat to national security. And Egypt's are panicking. So there's this huge growth in population that's taken long time between Genesis and Exodus. But Exodus chapter 1, the first few verses, give us continuity. They link the two books together. So in verse 5, chapter 1, verse 5, we read, the descendants of Jacob numbers 70 in all. Joseph was already in Egypt. And we know that if you read Genesis chapter 50, that his descendants were 70 in all, etc. So there's a nice link between the two books there. As we get to Exodus, we find that Abraham's family have now filled the land of Egypt, literally. So verse 7 says, the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly. They're breeding like rabbits. They increased in numbers and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. So there's been this huge growth in God's people, remembering the promise that God would give Abraham descendants like sand on the seashore, like stars in the sky. And now we're finding it. Like, you can't even count them. There's so many. Well, like I say, the people of Israel are afraid of the people of Egypt are afraid of the people of Israel because of this threat that these numbers are posing. And so they begin a program of ethnic cleansing, of wiping out, genocide. Infanticide is actually what it is. It's the cleansing, in this case, of all the male children of Israel. It's quite ominous that it's the males that are being wiped out, because you can imagine what they're wanting to keep the females for. But they're wiping out all the boys. This military threat gets wiped out. But under God's hand, as they begin this program of ethnic cleansing, the opposite happens. Verse 20 of chapter 1 says, God was kind to the midwives. Remember, the midwives are told to kill the boys. But God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. So the reverse of ethnic cleansing happens, and they multiply further and become very, very powerful. And even in chapter 2, when it's commanded that the boys be thrown into the Nile, God is ironically at work, so that Pharaoh's very own daughter ends up rescuing a particular Israelite child from death, even pays a salary to this child's biological mother to come and breastfeed the child and to raise him in the courts of Pharaoh. And it's Moses. And Moses' mother is now paid a salary to bring up Moses. The child is brought up in the courts of Pharaoh. We don't know exactly how much Moses knew about his ancestry, but we can imagine his mother would have told him where he actually came from and where his roots lay. But in chapter 2, verses 11 and 12, while visiting his people, he sees an Egyptian beating up a Hebrew. And he looks around, there's no one watching, and so Moses kills the Egyptian and buries him in the sand. Later it becomes apparent that actually there was someone watching. Moses had been spotted, and a price is put on his head. Pharaoh wants him dead, and so Moses flees all the way to Midian. So the cross is where he kills the Egyptian, and he flees all the way across to Midian, miles and miles away. There he gets married, and he becomes a shepherd, living there for many years, 40 years, we're told. 40 years he's the prince of Egypt, 40 years he's the shepherd in Midian, and 40 years he commands God's people. His life is broken up neatly into these 3 40s. During this time, though, while he's busy being a shepherd, the people back in Egypt are groaning, we're told. Israel groan, and God remembers his covenant. Now, the word remember, we mustn't think that God had forgotten. Remember means that God is about to act. When the Bible says God remembers, it means the time is now right. The time has come for God to do something about this. And he, as we read on, we find that he's going to take action through Moses, of the most unlikely people, a guy living in Midian, a murderer, an absolute nobody. God chooses him, a bit like Abram, do you remember? Abram had been living even further away, further south, when God called him in Ur of the Chaldeans. At this point, in chapter 3, verse 1, as Moses is going about his business, he takes his sheep to Mount Horeb, which is later referred to as Mount Sinai. It's the same mountain, Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai, the mountain of God, it becomes known as. And so he's taken his father-in-law's sheep all the way to Mount Sinai, and there he's grazing them. At Mount Sinai, in Exodus 3, Moses encounters God at the not burning bush. The flames are coming out the bush, but it's not burning. Do you remember? He can't understand what's going on. And he's told in chapter 3, verse 8 through to 10, what God is about to do. I've come down to rescue my people from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Can you imagine the shock? A shepherd, suddenly being told he is going to save the people of God. And he's got to go to Pharaoh, the most feared ruler of the superpower of the world, and tell him that he must release the entire labor force. Just let them all go. So throughout this section, God keeps reminding Moses that he has been chosen to be the rescuer of God's people. And Moses has got every excuse under the sun. He asks God in chapter 3, verse 11, who am I that I should go? Chapter 3:13, who are you that you should send me? Chapter 4, verse 1, they'll never believe me. Chapter 4, verse 10, I can't speak properly. Chapter 4:13, send someone else. And each time God says, no, I'm sending you. You will be the rescuer. And God is going to equip him for the task. In 3:12, God says that when Moses returns with the people to that same mountain, the not burning bush mountain, Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai, well, actually that will be the sign that God sent him. It's a bit of an oblique sign, don't you think? Moses says, what's the sign? How can I know for sure that that you will do this and that you really are calling me? And God says, well, go and do it. Come back here and you'll know that I've asked you to do it. In other words, what does God expect from Moses? Faith. My word should be enough. No signs, no wonders. Just go and do it and you'll be back here. And then you'll remember that actually it was me that spoke to you and that my word was sufficient. Now go. None of this nonsense about excuses. So chapter 3, verse 14 through to 17, God reveals himself to Moses as this name Yahweh that we've spoken about before, Yahweh, Y-H-W-H, the unpronounceable tetragrammaton, they call it. It's a tetragrammaton, a word with no vowels, unpronounceable. It's the name God chooses for himself. He is the God of Moses' fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He is the God of the covenant, the God of promise, the God who would rather die and be torn limb from limb than see his promises fail. His name means I will be who I am, or I am who I am. There's various ways of translating it. I will be who I am. In other words, I will be faithful to the promises I've made because of who I am. I cannot lie. I cannot make a promise I can't keep. It's just not in my nature, and it's physically not possible. For what I have said will pass, not to pass. And his name reflects that, Yahweh. Chapter 4, he enables Moses to perform miraculous signs to convince the people. Interestingly, he gives no sign to Moses, but he gives Moses a sign to convince the rabble. But Moses, he expects to live by faith. It's quite interesting, isn't it, that the devil did the same thing to Jesus. What sign will your father give you that you can trust your father? Before you go to the cross and put everything on the line, don't you think you should try and just have a little test run, a trial run, maybe turn some stones into bread, or maybe jump off the temple and see if the angels catch you. You might break a leg, but at least you're not going to be crucified and then God doesn't come, your father doesn't come to your rescue. Let's just have a trial run here. And Jesus says, no, I don't need a sign. Yeah, you don't put his word is sufficient. I trust my father. And so here Jesus is mirroring the way that God's dealt with Moses, that Moses got no sign. And Jesus got no sign. But the people do, the rabble do, to authenticate Moses and to authenticate Jesus. Now in chapter 4, verse 14 through to 16, Moses is told that he should appoint Aaron to be the spokesman, to speak for him, because he can't speak, he stammers, he's got a stammer. Clearly God is absolutely committed to rescuing his people. Nothing that Moses can say or do is going to frustrate God on this matter. It's a done deal. It's a done deal. God is going to rescue his people. So Moses takes the sheep back to his father-in-law, all the way back to Midian, and then he treks all the way, all the way across back to Egypt. So it's a lot of toing and froing. Oh, can you imagine all that time he had to think, leading his sheep all the way back from Sinai, all the way to his father-in-law, then walking all the way. I mean, it's months and months of travel. And all he's got is this promise ringing in his head. He must be thinking, I'm going crazy. What am I doing? You know. But God is driving him on. He drops the sheep off, goes back to Egypt. There he meets the elders of the people of Israel. He performs the miracles to reassure them that he has indeed been sent as the rescuer, as their rescuer. And together Moses and Aaron then decide, all right, we can't put this off any longer. We need to go and see Pharaoh. How they even got an audience with Pharaoh, I don't know. It's a new Pharaoh. It's a long, long, long time later. There's been a price on his head, you know. But he heads off into the courts of Pharaoh, and he urges Pharaoh to set the people free. But instead, Pharaoh makes their slavery even harder, questioning, who is this God? Who's this God that sent you? I don't know this God. In chapter 6, verse 6 to 8, God answers that question. And in so doing, he reassures Moses for the task. This is what God says. Therefore, say to the Israelites, I am the Lord. You know, who is this God? Who are you who's this God that he should come and tell me to let everyone go? Well, tell them, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. And I will bring you to the land I saw with uplifted hand to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord. In other words, my name should be enough. I don't have a higher name to swear by. I can't compare myself to another God. There is no other God. I am the Lord. That's all I can say. I am the Lord, and I will do it. So can you see what's happening here? Pharaoh says he doesn't know who this God is, and he doesn't see why he should listen to this God. And he's going to keep these people. God says, but they're my people. You must let them go. And Pharaoh says, I don't know you. They're my people. Go away. Go find some other people. Can you see that they're both laying claim to the same people? Now, it's really a battle between Pharaoh, who was deified and worshipped. The emperor, the Pharaoh was considered to be God. So here's a God, a man claiming to be God, going head to head with the Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Lord who cannot break a promise. And really there's a battle between which is the real God or not. There's only one true God, and which one is it? Well, God uses 9 miracle plagues to show Pharaoh who is the real God. And to begin with, Pharaoh's magicians can match God, but not for very long. Very soon they are stretched beyond what they can do. And the plagues are plagues of judgment, which are really just foreshadows of a greater judgment coming. We find that these plagues are reflected. Remember this when we get to the book of Revelation. The bowls are the plagues of Egypt. And throughout the Bible, these plagues come up again and again in various forms. So the plague of darkness, is always a sign of God's anger, God's wrath. Think about the cross when Jesus dies. The land is plunged into darkness for 3 hours. So these plagues, in their various forms, signify God's anger. In other words, what God is doing is he's giving Pharaoh 9 opportunities to repent. 9 chances. At any point, Pharaoh could have said, right, I'm convinced. Take these people and go. But he refuses. So he stubbornly holds out against God. And so when the 10th plague comes, the death of the firstborn, well, when God threatens that, even before it comes, when he just threatens it, it's an entirely fair and logical consequence to 9 opportunities that Pharaoh turns down to repent. The ultimate judgment is going to have to be death, isn't it? I mean, it's a bit like the death penalty. You don't have to use it, but you need it there. You even bring up kids. Whatever the ultimate punishment is for your kids, you need it. At least to have it available as a threat. But you need it. You need it there. And the ultimate, of course, punishment is death, where God takes your life back for himself. And then there's no more competition. Then the game is over. And so God, he postpones. He delays using that 9 times. He delays actually using the final judgment that he could have given at the very first point when Pharaoh defied him. Just as Pharaoh, it's interesting, isn't it? Just as Pharaoh had threatened the children of Israel, so God threatens Pharaoh. God describes Israel as my firstborn, and then what does he threaten Pharaoh with? The death of your firstborn. If you don't let my firstborn go, I'll take away your firstborn. It's an entirely fair and equitable threat that God gives to Pharaoh. And even at that point, God offers a way out. This plague would affect everyone in the land unless they painted the blood of a lamb over their doors. So this plague would have taken out all the Egyptians, as we know, but also all the Israelites. As Ezekiel chapter 20 tells us. I think I've got a slide for that. And look at these words. This is what the sovereign Lord says. On the day I chose Israel, I swore with uplifted hand to the descendants of Jacob and revealed myself to them in Egypt. With uplifted hand I said to them, I am the Lord your God. On that day I swore to them that I would bring them out of Egypt into a land I had searched out for them, a land flowing with milk and honey, the most beautiful of all lands. And I said to them, each of you, get rid of the vile images you have set your eyes on, and do not defile yourselves with the idols of Egypt. I am the Lord, your God. But they rebelled against me. Who's the they? The people of Israel. Not the Egyptians, the people of Israel. The people of Israel rebelled against me and would not listen to me. They did not get rid of the vile images that they had set their eyes on, nor did they forsake the idols of Egypt. So I said I would pour out my wrath on them and spend my anger against them in Egypt. But for the sake of my name, I brought them out of Egypt. I did it to keep my name from being profaned in the eyes of the nations among whom they lived, and in whose sight I had revealed myself to the Israelites. Therefore I led them out of Egypt and brought them into the wilderness. Because God had made a promise, and he's not going to let their idolatry get in the way of him keeping his side of the bargain. His name, the honor of his name is at stake, and he will do it. And so they're as bad as the Egyptians. When they built the golden calf, do you remember how they built it? They got the gold, they melted it, and then they carefully handcrafted the golden calf. Of course, when Aaron is confronted by Moses, he says, what is this you've done? He says, no, we took the gold, we threw it in the fire, and I popped the calf. Just lies straight to Moses' face. But if you read the account, he carefully hand-carved it. This was not the first golden calf that Aaron had ever carved in his life. These people had spent generations, 400 years, carving images out of gold and other materials to worship in Egypt. They were not a faithful people at all. And they absolutely deserved God's wrath and judgment on them. But they get what they don't deserve. They get rescue when they deserve judgment. In other words, if anyone living in Egypt, whether you were Israelite or Egyptian or any other nation, and we'll see later that many other people groups also left Egypt when Moses led the Israelites out, if anyone wanted to be spared this judgment, they were told what to do. They wanted the angel of death to pass over their homes. They had to celebrate the Passover. They had to slaughter a lamb. That lamb would redeem the life of the firstborn. It would die as a substitute in the place of the firstborn of every family. And not only was it a day that would take place once, it was also a day that would be remembered forever thereafter. And we know that the Jews to this day still celebrate the Passover. Of course, Jesus replaced the Passover with the Lord's Supper, or Holy Communion. He took the elements from the table where they were celebrating the Last Supper, and he says, from now on, when you eat this, you'll remember me. You're not going to remember the lamb. You're going to remember me. When you drink this, you're going to remember my blood, not the lamb's blood. So stop celebrating the Passover and start celebrating communion, the Lord's Supper, whatever you want to call it in your church, the Lord's table. But today we're still remembering the death of the real Passover lamb. That lamb that was killed in Egypt was just a picture of what God would do later to his son. He would kill his son in the place of us. And so we remember that till the day he comes back. That's what Corinthians says. Hey, remember this until my return. Forever. This is going to be commemorated, the fact that sinners can be saved through a substitutionary sacrifice. Once again, Pharaoh pays absolutely no attention to the warning, and, well, he gets what he deserves. The loss of firstborn people and animals right across the whole of Egypt. I mean, can you imagine that? Not a single home was unaffected. There was a death in every single family. It must have been absolutely horrendous. You know, you can go and comfort someone, your neighbor, when they've lost a child. But when you've lost a child and they've lost a child, there's no one to comfort anyone. The whole land is plunged into grief and mourning because they're getting what was coming to them. Finally, in chapter 12, verse 31 to 32, we read, during the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron, this is after the death of the firstborn, and said, up, leave my people, you and the Israelites, go. Worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds as you have said, and go. And also bless me, he says. He's conscious now that suddenly, actually, he's not an equal to this God. He still doesn't acknowledge this God, but he knows that Moses is a mediator. Moses is somehow a priest of this God. Bless me, he says. And so starts the journey of the people of Israel out of Egypt to Mount Sinai, which is told for us. That journey is told for us in the next sections, chapter 13 through to 18. They traveled.
Just ask a question about that blood on the door. Did any Egyptians or non-Israelites follow it? I mean, were they all told about it, and did any respond and do it?
We're not told that Egyptians did, but I think that if they had, they would have been spared. We are told that dozens of, the Egyptians had enslaved the whole world, and dozens of other nationalities also went with Moses. And so when God tells them how to set up the camp in the desert, remember in the north you must put Judah, in the south you must put Benjamin, in the east you must put whatever. The 12 tribes are carefully laid out around the ark. And then around them are all the camps of the other people that had come with them. So I take it that they took the warning to heart. Yeah. It's amazing. This death of the firstborn and the annihilation of the Egyptian army the memory of that lasted centuries and centuries and centuries. Wherever the Israelites go from now on, the people are terrified of them because of what happened in Egypt. So news spread like crazy about what had happened, what God had done to the God of Egypt, Pharaoh. How he had absolutely smacked him. And the God of Pharaoh, the God of Egypt, namely Pharaoh, he had been invincible. I mean, he had conquered the world. There was no other people with their national gods that could stand against him. So, your God couldn't help you when Pharaoh came marching over the hill. But here comes a God who comes marching over the hill into Pharaoh's backyard and absolutely wipes him out. And that fear spread across the whole known world at the time. So God directs their travels personally. He leads them with a pillar of cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night towards the Red Sea. But it's not long before Pharaoh changes his mind. He decides he wants his labor force back, and he sets off after them with an army of foot soldiers, chariots, and horsemen. In chapter 14, reading from verse 10, we read, as Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Of course, they're lying. It's a plain lie. No, they never said, leave us here. They all wanted to get out, but now they realize they're in massive, massive trouble. And so starts the grumbling. The mark, which actually marks all their travels. Every time they're traveling, they're grumbling. It's just what they do. When they're on the road, they moan, a bit like kids in the back seat of the car. You can't help fighting when they start moving. And God bears with them, amazingly, to a point. Because God puts up with an amazing amount of grumbling and defiance and rejection and accusation all the way to Mount Sinai. God puts up with this nonsense. But the minute He's given them the law, they get punished when they grumble. It's almost like this is the honeymoon period. This is the chance for them to get to know their God. They need to grow up as children under their Father's care. And He tolerates this. He tolerates it. He tolerates it. But only up to Sinai. After Sinai, the whole way He deals with Israel changes. As you remember, they build the golden calf at Sinai. And that changes everything. From that moment on, that generation is doomed. And God is over. He's over them. But nevertheless, God rescues them mightily from chapter 14, 21 through to the end of the chapter. And you can go and read that in your own time. As the water is opened and then closed over the Egyptian army. It's very, very important that we remember that God rescued them. They did not escape. They were rescued. I always, anyway, think that they escaped from Pharaoh, and they escaped from Pharaoh's army, but they didn't. They were useless. They were powerless. They weren't soldiers. They were bricklayers, building pyramids. And here comes the world's biggest army over them. And the only thing that can save them is a rescue. And that's what God provides. And it's the same with us as well. If we are spared God's judgment, it will be because we were rescued, not because we escaped it. We have to be rescued. The simple human being needs rescue. So by God's mighty outstretched hand, God rescues His people from Egypt. In chapter 15, Moses and his sister acknowledge the power of God in their victory song, the wonderful song that they sing in praise of the God who rescues them. And in this song, they look forward to God taking them and giving them the promised land. But the people still grumble. Can you believe it? They've just been rescued, spared annihilation. And the same chapter 15, 24. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, what are we going to drink? And again, the Lord bears with them. He provides for them. And He does that through a miracle. He turns bitter water into sweet water, making water drinkable. That was unpalatable. Now then they go off to Mount Sinai. How long do you think, we'll get to there. How many of them do you think were traveling from out of Egypt and to Mount Sinai? Yeah, at least 1 million. At least. Probably 2 million, they say. With all the hanger-oners and all the relatives. And then all the flocks and the herds as well. It's an enormous bunch of people to feed, to water, to clothe, to keep healthy. I mean, it's just a massive humanitarian. You know, if that sort of number of refugees arrived on your doorstep, it would crush your country. It would just suck your country dry of resources. And here, God doesn't take them to a country that's well-resourced. He takes them into the middle of nowhere, where there isn't a thing to eat and nothing to drink. What do you think He's trying to prove to them?
He's the provider. Absolutely.
There is no way that anyone could mistake the fact that if it wasn't for God, we would die. Yeah. It was the most inhospitable part of the world that He could think of that He's going to take them to, so that they can watch Him feed them. They can drink the water He's going to give them. 2 million are going to eat and drink every day at His hand. And the idea was that they would grow in their trust. That you would think that would help them to trust Him a little bit more. But it doesn't. So the promised land is Canaan. And God is going to take them to Canaan. That's what Moses and Miriam sing in their song. And so where does God take them? In the opposite direction. Because they need to learn this lesson, I think. If he had taken them straight there, the land of milk and honey, dropped them off, well, they would have turned straight back to their idols. In fact, they had them with them and carried them along with them. But he doesn't. He takes them down to teach them how to trust him, to teach them who he is, to meet with them, and for them to get to know him before they head up into Canaan. But as they travel southwards, so they grumble again. Chapter 16, verse 2 and 3. This time, they're moaning about the food. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into the desert to starve this entire assembly to death." So melodramatic. And did they ever sit around pots of meat to eat? No. Do you remember how Pharaoh had hardened their labor and reduced their rations? They never, ever. I don't know what they were thinking of. But notice what the word is that is used here. God brought them, they're convinced, God has brought them out here to starve them.
Yeah.
But what is he doing to them? The opposite of starving. They will not trust him. And they say he's going to starve this entire assembly. That word assembly is the word church. It's where we get the word church from. Church has its origins all the way back to this assembly, God's people gathered around God's word, trusting him, sort of, and him leading them. If you have a people like that, that's called a church or an assembly. I love the name Assemblies of God. It's the best name I can possibly think of for a denomination or an association. Assemblies of God. A whole bunch of assemblies, God's people gathered together in this affiliation that they would call a denomination, whatever word they use. Assemblies of God. I wish I'd thought of that. So much better than the Church of England in South Africa, which is actually not a church. You can't have a church made up of disparate assemblies. Yeah. Each one is a church, but together they're not the church of the province or the Methodist church or the Presbyterian church or the Anglican church. That's not a church. That's an association of churches, but it's not a church. And I had a big fight with our bishops. They're going to watch this. Because we had the opportunity to change our name from Church of England in South Africa to Reach SA, which is much easier because that just stands for the Reformed Evangelical Anglican Church of South Africa. And I said, please, can we not use the word church in our name? We can keep the C, but let's use it to be congregations or churches, but not church. The Reformed Evangelical Anglican, I'm happy with all of that, churches of South Africa or congregations of South Africa, but not church. It's not a church. And I was told to shut up. Keep quiet, I didn't know this one. But I really am right. The church is God's people gathered together in one place, not spread out all over the countryside. So they travel, whenever they're traveling, they're grumbling, and God provides manna and quail for them so that they can eat. Imagine how much manna and quail. Just imagine. To feed 2 million people, how many quail came down? How much manna, Again, in chapter 17, as we plow our way through, the people are now not just grumbling, they're quarreling with Moses. They don't have enough water to drink. The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded, and they camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, give us water to drink. Moses said, why are you quarreling with me? I didn't bring you here. I'm just the piano player. Don't quarrel with me. Why are you putting the Lord to the test? And really, it was a test. This whole journey is a test. It really is a test they need to pass. Because the test is whether they're going to trust him or not. And they're not learning. So far, they've made no progress. They're still 0 out of 10 when it comes to trusting their father for food and water. A bit like you. A bit like me. Like, I don't know where the next, how are we going to pay the bills in this month? I think we did. This time we finished. This time not even God can help us. We're just like this. This is the paradigm for God's people. Always has been. We're tempted to think that we're a bit like Moses and Aaron, and we must be upright, faithful servants. But actually, they're the paradigm of Christ. These people are our paradigm. This is what we are like. Grumbling, moaning, anxious, not content, better before, which is always better before. Now we're out here and we're doing God's will and it's not going so well. It was better before. This is exactly a picture of us. And we should learn from them. It would be good if we could learn from them. And God provides them with water. He commands Moses to strike a rock with his staff for water to come from it. This is a very, very important point. The command is, go and, let me try and find it. Take with you some of the elders of Israel. Take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, the water will come out of it for the people to drink. And Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. Remember, Peter says that Jesus is that rock. That rock that produced water was Jesus. Whatever that means. We won't go there now, but go and read what he says and see if you can work it out. But later on, Moses is going to die without going into the promised land because he has sinned against God. Because a second time, in Numbers chapter 20, again, the people need water to drink, and again they're moaning, and God says this time, don't strike the rock. What does he say? Do you remember? Chapter 20, verse 8. Take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to that rock. This is the second rock. Speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. You'll bring water out of the rock for the community so that they and their livestock can drink. So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence, just as he had commanded him. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock? Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water gushed out. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me, you showed you did not trust me by striking the rock and not speaking to it. You will die and you will not get to the promised land. In other words, what was Moses doing? Clearly, he wasn't trusting God. He didn't trust that God's word was powerful enough. God's word was sufficient to bring forth water. Sheesh, how's this going to come out of nowhere? I'm just going to close this door. If you're online, we've just been hit by a squall of wind. Moses didn't think that the word of God was sufficient to achieve God's will. He thought he should use the magic stick. He thought the power was in the stick. So he whacks the rock not once but twice with the stick. Because he thinks that the power of God is in the stick. But the power of God is not in the stick, is it? The power of God is in the word of God. God does his word through his work, through his word by his spirit. Not by sticks or anything else for that matter, but by the spoken word. God's word carries God's authority. And God speaks, he gets what he wants.
Was it also that he was angry towards the people? His attitude was not correct.
Well, God never condemns him for that. I think God is also a bit irritated with him at this point. So he's never actually chastised.
That wasn't the sin.
No, the sin was not trusting God's word. Yeah. It says that, hey, because you did not trust me, you will not go to Egypt. Because you used the stick and not your word, my word. You think my word is not trustworthy, don't you, Moses? Even after all this time, you still don't think my word is trustworthy, that I'm a God of my word. Amazing. Let's close this. So throughout this traveling period, there's this great interplay between sin on their part, mercy on God's part. You know, whoever said that God was angry in the Old Testament and gracious in the New Testament hasn't read the Old Testament. Because God is exceedingly gracious and merciful. Over and over and over again, he is tested. You're testing the Lord. You're testing the Lord, Moses says to the people. And then he tests the Lord. And God is merciful. God is merciful the whole time. By chapter 19, the first part of their journey ends and they arrive at Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. That's Mount Sinai today. That's, it's pretty ominous, isn't it? Have you guys been there? Yeah, you have.
We'll tell you the story afterwards.
Okay.
It's a cool cat, yeah.
Okay. Mount Sinai, that's their destination. God brought them miles and miles and miles to see that.
Where is it in Saudi Arabia or something?
Yeah, southern Saudi Arabia, on that peninsula.
Yeah.
Yeah. The city, the mountain of God, fulfilling what? God has brought them here to fulfill what?
Moses.
Moses' promise. That when you come back here, this time with the people, you will know that I was with you. And so they do. They arrive back, and that is the evidence that God was rescuing them.
It's still Egypt.
Oh, Egypt. Okay. Not Saudi Arabia. Yeah. That's right, of course. Yeah. So God's people, going back to our matrix, our table. Shane, just check the sound quality with the interference from the storm. God's people, they're not in God's land yet, but they're on the way. They have been blessed by God, haven't they? They have been blessed with numerical growth, as He had promised Abraham. They've been blessed with food, with water, with protection. They've been rescued out of slavery. And so the promise to Abraham is slowly coming to pass. Well, the next little section, we'll do one more section, then we'll have a break for tea. This is going to be a long session. We might not have time for the second session tonight. Exodus 19 all the way through to Numbers chapter 10. How long do you think the Israelites camped at Mount Sinai?
2 years.
Yeah, exactly. 2 years. Much longer than I thought. 2 years they spend camping at Mount Sinai as God gives them His word and gives them His law. And they can digest it, and they can discuss it, and they can live it out. 2 years. They receive this constitution, really, that God gives them as a new nation. A nation that He has created literally out of nothing. Not just talking about having created them out of Egypt. He created them from nothing because Sarah couldn't have a child. She was as good as dead. Well, Abram was as good as dead. She had been childless, and God creates a child out of nothing. And this nation comes out of that child. And these chapters, Exodus 19 to 24, tells us how God makes a covenant with these people. So He's already made a covenant with Noah, He's made a covenant with Abraham, and now He makes a covenant with these people through Moses. This one, though, is not a deal. This one is conditional. Sorry, this one is a deal. This is not just, I will do this no matter what. This is absolutely conditional. So chapter 19, verse 5, and then I think we better stop. Make this pass. Now, if you, listen to these words, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Throughout the whole, although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. So it depends on their absolute obedience. If you obey me fully, then I will choose you out of the nations to be my people. Leaving, of course, the question of what if they don't. And we'll pick that up. Let's have a break for tea, and hopefully the storm goes over. That's really God married Israel at this mountain. This is really the marriage ceremony. This is the conditions of the relationship being set down. If you do this, then I will do this. If you do that, then expect this from me. And God is putting kind of the boundaries in place for how He's going to deal with this nation. And like I said, it's a conditional covenant, conditional on their full obedience. They need to obey fully, which we know immediately is going to spell trouble because of what human nature is. So Abraham's family had become a nation. a nation who God calls a priesthood, a kingdom of priests, and a holy nation. Holy nation just means a set aside nation. A nation, that's what actually he says. He says, out of all the nations, I'm struggling here, although the whole earth is mine, out of all the nations, you are going to be my treasured possession. I'm going to set you aside for myself. That means they were holy. Doesn't mean they were good or sacred in any way, but they were holy. His mark was on them. They belonged to him. And they are to be a kingdom of priests. Now, where do you need a priest? What is a priest's job in the Old Testament? Well, it's to mediate, isn't it? It's to meet between God and sinners. You need a priest to come and offer sacrifices on your behalf. So what does this immediately imply was meant to be the role of Israel as a nation? What is their purpose in being called?
To be mediators.
To mediate between and the world. Remember Abram's promise? Through you, all nations will be blessed. Abram, through you and your descendants, i.e. Israel, blessing instead of curse is going to come to all nations. Israel was meant to be a nation of missionaries. They were meant to be a missionary nation. To take all this law that they're receiving at Mount Sinai, to take it into the world and to introduce the world to their God. They're meant to be evangelists. And of course we know what Israel did with this knowledge of God. They kept it for themselves and said, you know, what good people we must be that God chose us. We must be very, very special. We must be exceedingly special. In fact, so special that we weren't going to associate with anyone else, as you guys experienced. And they still like it. They believe that God's chosen people because they were so special. Deuteronomy 9. Moses knows that this is exactly what they're going to think. Oh, now I've opened my mouth. Let's see if I can find it. I'm not in my own Bibles. Moses is now coming to the end of his life, and he's addressing the people way down the line. They're camped on the Jordan River bank, about to enter into the promised land with Joshua. And Moses says this: after the Lord your God has driven the people out, the Canaanites out before you, do not say to yourself, the Lord has brought me here to take possession of this land because of my righteousness. He says, you're going to think that. You're going to say that, but don't do it. Don't think it was because you were righteous that God chose you. No. It is on account of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is going to drive them out before you. You're not special. He says, but these nations are going to be judged and they're going to be driven out and God's going to drive them out. Don't think you're doing it. It is not because of your righteousness or your integrity that you're going in to take possession of the land, but on account of the wickedness of the nations that the Lord your God is going to drive out in front of you, to accomplish what he swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You are not special, Israel. You're not righteous. You're not people of integrity. But God made a promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to accomplish that promise, he's going to drive out these nations and give you this land as a gift to undeserving people. So Moses knows, and, well, they did exactly what Moses said they shouldn't do. They're meant to represent God to the nations as a kingdom of priests. Their blessing and their being a blessing to the world is dependent, though, on their obedience, which is a big problem. God wants to bless the world, and he wants to use Israel to do that, but him blessing the world is going to depend on the obedience of this mediator that he has chosen, this nation that he has chosen. But even before they even hear the law, before they even hear what God is going to ask them to do, they agree to do it. How arrogant is that? Whatever you say, we will do. Whatever you ask of us, we will do it. No problem. Count it done is what they say. As verse 8 tells us, we will do everything the Lord has said. And again, after the law is given, both in its summary form of the Ten Commandments and in the applications of those Ten Commandments that are chapters 21 through to 24, it's the fleshing out of the Ten Commandments. what do you call it in law? You might know, Craig, where there's the law is given and then there's case law after that. Is that right? I think that's right.
Common law.
Common law.
Yeah.
And that's what God has done here. He's given them the specific law and then he gives them case law, common law. With 21, 22, 23, 24, chapter 21 to 24 of Exodus, is applications of the law. So I say, love your neighbor. That means when your neighbor's donkey falls in your trench, you must rescue that donkey and give it back to them. And if it dies, you should pay your neighbor. It's all that sort of thing. It's the outworkings of what it means to love God and love your neighbor. And after God has given them everything, they agree to obey God wholeheartedly. No problem, no problem. We'll do it. And they ratify the covenant in a formal way. Well, chapters that follow from 25 through to 31, as well as 35 to 40, as well as the whole of the book of Leviticus, is dominated by a couple of themes. The tent of meeting. I'm trying to think what these have in common. The tent of meeting, curtains of separation, Holy of Holies, the Ark of the Covenant, the tabernacle furniture, the altars, and the priests. What is all that stuff? What's that all got to do with?
It's to do with repentance.
Yeah, it's got to do with relating to God. It's got to do with how these sinful people are going to relate to this God. And it's going to be through repentance and sacrifice. Through sacrifice, through something dying in their place, and through something getting what they deserve, they're going to get what they don't deserve, which is relationship with God. And all of those chapters are all about the stuff that is needed to keep this relationship on track. It's going to be priests and altars and bowls and washing things and tabernacles and curtains to keep people away from God, that they mustn't get too close because he'll destroy them. All that stuff. It's got to do with setting the boundaries, relational boundaries between sinful people and holy God and a holy God. First, Moses is commanded to build these different things, chapters 25 to 31, and he builds them in chapters 35 through to 40. So the Ark of the Covenant, which is carried on those poles, the tent of meeting, and all that goes with it, the basin of washing, to wash, which really is the first sign of baptism, washings. Remember Hebrews, I think, talks about various washings that have fallen away now. It's the washings that you had to go through, the ritualistic washings, the sacrifice on the altar, the Holy of Holies, which is right at the back, and the curtain of separation that kept you away from getting too close to God if you went to priests and all that stuff. Then in Leviticus, so he's built them, he's told to build them, how to build them, 25 to 31. 35 to 40, he actually builds them. And then Leviticus, he's told what to do with the things that he's built. Right, Moses, now you've built these things, here's how you use them. This is what the basin is for, this is what the altar is for, this is how you meant to put up the tent, this is how you meant to carry the ark. All the instructions for how to actually use things, how to offer certain different types of sacrifices, burnt offerings, sin offerings, guilt offerings, grain offerings, fellowship offerings, wave offerings. All these different offerings that you had to offer at various times of the year for various offenses or days of remembrance. They are chapters, Leviticus is chapters all about the presence of God. The presence of God as he dwells in the Holy of Holies. And these offerings are to keep our sin at a low enough level, I guess, that God's glory doesn't consume us. Well, them, the Israelites. It was necessary to do these sacrifices. I don't know if there was one every day, probably. There was certainly the Day of Atonement, where sins were offered for the entire nation once a year. And it had to be done day after day after day to keep the count low. Yes.
Sorry, Andy, just repeat that. You said Leviticus is all about?
About God's presence.
God's presence.
About God's holy presence, yeah. And what's necessary to live near a God like that? What is it going to take to live even in the same universe as a God like that, actually? So great is his glory that it will consume you anywhere that you are. He can only be approached through priests and through sacrifices. After sacrifices have been offered, first for the priest, for his own sins, and then for you, then you can now have a relationship with God. Sort of, if you call that a relationship. Well, why is all of this so necessary? I don't know if you picked up as I was reading in those various chapters. I skipped over chapters 32 to 34 of Exodus. Up to 31, we spoke about commands for building. After 34, we were told about all this stuff. And what happened in between, 32 to 34? It's the golden calf incident, where people did not take precautions against offending a holy God. These people are as sinful as the Egyptians that they were rescued from. They are just the same. And they know better than the Canaanites and the Girgashites and everybody else that they're going to go and take possession of the land. It is not because of your righteousness, God says, or your integrity. You're not better than them. Don't think I'm giving you the land because you're any better than the tribes that you displace. You're not displacing them. Actually, I'm driving them out and you're getting it as a gift. You're just walking in and taking over their cities. You didn't raise a finger to build those cities. They built the golden calf, which was a massive affront to God. Do you remember what they say when they build that golden calf? Aaron presents the calf to the people after he's carefully hand-carved it. And he says, "Behold, the God that rescued you from Egypt." Can you believe it? This is Aaron, who was there in the courts of Pharaoh, speaking on behalf of God and Moses, saw the miracles with a stick turning into a snake, all of that stuff, and he says, "Here's your God that rescued you. Worship this one." In other words, forget about the God up the mountain, the God who keeps giving us rules that we must now obey. It's much easier to worship this God. It's interesting, isn't it, that much later on, when the kingdom of Israel split between north and south, Israel in the north, Judah in the south, Judah remained sort of faithful to God in Jerusalem. Israel go up north and they make Samaria their capital. And they set up in Samaria their own temple worship. They built a temple like there was in Jerusalem. And they got 2 golden calves there for good measure. They create 2 golden calves and they say, "Here are your gods, Israel. Worship them." And the people do. It's even worse than this. And so it just literally gets worse and worse as generations go on. How is this holy God going to live amongst people like this? Well, only if their sin can be atoned for. If their sin can be somehow taken away. And that's what sacrifices are all about. These people are thoroughly bad. And if God does nothing for them, He will destroy them. His glory will consume them. So God's wrath has to go somewhere. It's got to go somewhere. Remember we spoke about the difference between propitiation and expiation. Expiation is the word that the RSV uses, which is the fact that God's wrath just gets swept under the carpet. It just evaporates. Propitiation says that God's wrath has to be directed somewhere, and it has to be absorbed by something. And of course, God gave His Son to be a propitiation for our sin. God's wrath's got to go somewhere, and it'll go to you if you don't have a substitute readily at hand. And the sacrifices are that substitute, that God's wrath can be sort of atoned for. It looked like their sins were being forgiven every time they offered a sacrifice. But when we get to the book of Romans, we realize actually they weren't. God's wrath was being banked all throughout those years. It was being stored up and then poured out on Christ. Because the blood of a goat or a pigeon or a lamb can never atone for the sin of a human being. It can never. The Israelites thought it could. But actually it was just a picture that God was giving them, that one day an ultimate sacrifice is going to be provided for you that will really propitiate your sins. You really will. My wrath really will be completely absorbed by a propitiation I'm going to provide. Is what God is showing them throughout the Old Testament. So God is merciful, again, in the midst of their sinfulness, but mercy simply can't leave sin to go unpunished. That's not mercy. That's just injustice. Okay? Sin will be punished, and this system offered a means for the punishment to be directed away from them, onto this animal, but actually it didn't go there. It went off them into heaven and was banked. It was stored up for the day of wrath, when it was poured out on Christ. for the believer, for the faithful Jew, like Aaron, like Moses, Caleb, Joshua. Those are the ones we know for sure were faithful. Their sins were banked, and God's wrath for their sins fell on Jesus. But for the rest of the human race who refused to accept God's propitiation that He has offered, namely Himself, in the form of Jesus Christ, well, that wrath that has been banked, and every day your account is getting bigger. One day that account is going to be emptied, and His wrath will come to you. You will get what you deserve, unless you have someone prepared to step in and take it for you. And that someone can only be God Himself. I can't take your sins, your punishment, sorry. I've got enough coming my own way. But God can, and He has. He's offering to do that. Leviticus 1 through to 7 focuses on the sacrifices. Leviticus 8 to 10 focuses on the ordination of priests who are going to be doing the sacrifices. Aaron is the first high priest, despite, of course, his little blip in his CV of carving a golden calf. God overlooks that and is gracious to Aaron and makes him the first high priest of Israel. I wouldn't have. Would you? Well, that's because that's lucky we're not God. Leviticus 11 through to 15 focuses on the laws of separation and holiness, telling people what they could and couldn't eat. They were to be, remember, a nation holy. That doesn't mean good. It doesn't mean anything other than different. They were to be a distinct nation. A nation that is distinct because they've got a distinct God. The other nations have all got their gods, and they all carry on the way you would expect them to when they've got immoral, gluttonous gods. Well, then the people are going to be immoral, gluttonous people. They just reflect their gods. You are what you worship, after all. But He has a people with a true and living holy God, and they are to be distinct. And so all those laws of separation, the clothes you wear, your hairstyle, the food you eat has got to be distinct. You've got to stand out like a sore thumb, is what God wants. He wants people to recognize that this nation is a nation of priests. If you want help with your sin, go to this nation, because they are distinct. And they are reflecting the God who rescued them. Into all of these laws are the rather embarrassing laws of bodily discharges that we come across. Heaven forbid I ever ask you to do that reading for me in church. And there's different laws about women's bodily discharges and men's bodily discharges. And it's all quite embarrassing and awkward when you get to read about it. Because the laws say that you're unclean when you have one of these bodily discharges. In other words, unacceptable to God. Your relationship with God is fractured at that point. You have to go and live outside the camp. Remember? And you've got to offer sacrifices as if you've sinned. What on earth is the point of that? Making laws about things that are absolutely natural and normal. How can something that's absolutely natural and normal result in you being unclean in God's eyes? Well, the answer is because you're a human being. In other words, in the points, not just one time, but several times a month, every human being is going to go and have to live outside the camp. For no other reason than they're a human being, doing what human beings do. And it is meant to be a huge lesson to Israel that you are constantly unclean. Never ever are you clean. Never ever think that you're acceptable in your own strength and in who you are before God. You're constantly unclean and unfit for a relationship with Him. It is a massive, can you imagine living in that, under those conditions? Constantly, outside the camp you go, and back in and out again, and back come in, and just law after law after law after law about things that if you touch and if you do, and if it happens to you, if something you minding your own business and someone who's unclean touches you, now you're unclean. Now you also go out of camp with them, It's just, oh boy. It's a huge, huge burden, but it was very, very powerful message being taught by those laws, the clean, unclean laws. It had nothing to do with being able to refrigerate pork or anything like that, has been often espoused, that they weren't refrigerated so you couldn't eat pork. It had nothing to do with it. It had to do with being distinct. Your diet was to look different. People were going to ask you, why don't you guys eat pork? And then you've got an opportunity to evangelize them, to be a priest to them. People are going to ask you, why don't you shave your sideburns? People ask you, why do you wear those clothes? Why don't you plant carrots and cabbages next to each other? Why do you separate all your veggies? Why do you do this? Why do you do that? When your house gets a bit of mold, why do you move out? The whole family's going to move out. Go offer a sacrifice. That's a weird thing. Exactly. It's meant to be weird. It's meant to show that you're different to the rest of the world. Leviticus 16 is the heart of the book of Leviticus. It explains the Day of Atonement, which is a huge day. It's the biggest day in the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur. Do you remember in the 7-day war, the Arab forces attacked Israel on the Day of Atonement because the Israeli forces, they thought, wouldn't fight back or couldn't or weren't meant to take up arms and all of that. Well, they learned their lesson, but it is the Day of Atonement. Remember we spoke about that word, at-one-ment. It is the day once a year where Israel and God could kind of start with a clean slate and be at one again. And then the sins would start banking up, start piling up. And they would offer these daily sacrifices, monthly sacrifices, annual sacrifice comes around, Day of Atonement, and the slate gets cleaned. And they can start again. And that's how it worked. But of course, the slate wasn't really clean. Romans says those sins were stored away for later atonement, real atonement, not the atonement through the blood of a sheep or a bull or something. You had to offer atonement for your known sins and for your unknown sins. So in the Anglican tradition, in my sort of background, we have prayers of commission, sins of commission and sins of omission. Commission are the sins that I commit knowingly. I knowingly do these things. But the sins of omission are the sins that I don't know that I'm committing. So I pass someone that I could have helped and I don't. Or I do something unknowingly that hurts someone. I'm constantly either committing sins of commission or omission. And Israelites had to offer sacrifices for both. Because they're just, again, being taught you are thoroughly sinful. It's not just the things you do wrong, it's the things you don't do right that will also send you to hell. And they had to offer these sacrifices for known sins and unknown sins through 2 goats. 1 goat for the known sins, 1 goat for the unknown sins, and they became known as the scapegoats. The scapegoat. Aaron and his successors had to kill the first goat, and they would scatter its blood in the most holy place, signifying that God's wrath had fallen on that goat. Signifying. It hadn't actually. Remember, it was going to fall on Jesus. Signifying that God's wrath would be taken away by a sacrifice. And that was the sins of commission, the known sins. You sacrificed a sin for what you knew you had done wrong. A sacrifice for what you knew you had done wrong. The second goat, the scapegoat, would have hands laid on it and it's sent out into the desert. It was Israel's scapegoat. In other words, their sins, it was a picture of their sin being taken away from the presence of God. The presence of God was pictured by being the tent of meeting with the Holy of Holies inside. And as that goat was not this time slaughtered, but led away further and further and further out into the desert. So it was a very, very powerful picture. That, number 1, your sins deserve death. And number 2, if you're a faithful Israelite, your sins will be taken away into Never Never Land. Taken away into the sunset, never to be brought up again. It's a beautiful picture, isn't it? Of God's utter, thorough forgiveness of sins that would one day come through Jesus. But the point is very clear. Your sin needs to be dealt with. It's the massive wall between you and God that needs to be dealt with. Otherwise, you will reap what you've sown. Leviticus 17 through to 27 gives us all the applications, like I said, of the law, the case law, the common law, especially how to live together as Israelites. Remember the command is to love one another. Oh boy, how do you do that? How do I love one another and how do I relate to fellow Israelites, other people in God's community? Very interesting, isn't it, how Romans does that. Paul does exactly the same thing. So after 12 chapters of doctrine, he goes on to the next 4 or 5 chapters of how to live together as God's community, and also how God's community must live with those outside the community. Remember the whole bit about feeding your enemy and all of that stuff, how you're meant to deal with people who've got it in for you. Leviticus 26 is another important chapter. It's a great summary of God's dealings with his people, how he will deal with them when they're obedient, and how he will deal with them when they're disobedient. Obedience will bring blessings, which echoes the perfection of Eden. When you read about that, it really does sound like Eden that he's talking about. Disobedience is going to bring curse, which actually reminds you of the scattering at Babel. So really what you have here is Eden and Babel being presented to the Israelites as options. Which do you want, guys? Obedience will give you Eden. Disobedience will give you Babel. Scattering, confusion, scattered out of God's presence. What do you want? And of course they choose disobedience. They choose to be scattered, which is exactly what happens. They end up being driven out of the land during the exile. We'll get there. Just as Adam and Eve were driven out of the land of the garden when they also chose disobedience over obedience. By the end of Leviticus, we're faced with a great conundrum. A great dilemma faces the human race, or certainly the Israelites. God has made this unconditional promise to Abraham. I will, 5 times, I will do this. But this has now become a deal. If you do this, I will do that. How is God going to keep this promise if the people can't keep their side of the deal? The answer is that we need someone to come and be obedient on our behalf. We need God to come and keep his own law, because only he can keep it. It's only really capable, only God is capable of loving his enemies perfectly. We can't even love our friends perfectly, let alone our enemies. And so what we need is God to come, keep the law, and then give us the credit for it. And it's of course exactly what happens on the cross. Well, Jesus' life is him keeping the law. And God says, this is my son with whom I am well pleased. God never says those words over a human being, a normal human being. But he says those words of Christ. And then that perfection, that certificate, that 100% matric pass certificate is given to you and me when we put our faith in that, in Christ. And then all our imperfections, all our failures, all our sins that are being banked up with, and they are transferred to Jesus' account. And he suffers the wrath and the fury of God on the cross. And so he gets treated like we should be. We get treated like he should be. And that's substitutionary atonement. That's how God deals with this problem of sinners coming to live in heaven with him one day. Numbers, we need it in our Numbers. Starts with the census. That's why it's called the book of Numbers, because there are lots of numbers. God is numbering the people. In the first 10 chapters, the numbers are huge as you read them. It shows tremendous growth of God's people. It's amazing how God has kept this promise to Abraham before they move off from Mount Sinai. So the first 10 chapters is the census at Sinai before the people head off in a northerly direction towards the promised land. We've fallen way behind on our slides here, sorry. So the people are now down at Mount Sinai being numbered, and I'll leave it there, and they're going to head off north. But before that happens, they get numbered. Really, this is the census of the generation that's going to die outside of the land because of the golden calf. In other words, they are going to bring on themselves the Leviticus 26 curses. They're going to get what God promised they would get for disobedience. And we'll see there's another census halfway through the book of the next generation, those who are going to get the land, that God is going to bring into the land. So Numbers 10 through to 12 tell us about their journey to Kadesh Barnea and their grumbling again. Remember, when they're on the move, they moan. Chapter 11, verse 1, they're moaning. 11, verse 4, they're moaning. Chapter 12, they're moaning constantly. Then they come and they camp at Kadesh Barnea, chapter 13 through to 20. And it tells us about life, what life is like in Kadesh Barnea. 12 spies are sent from Kadesh Barnea into Canaan. 10 come back with negative reports. Only Joshua and Caleb say that they should enter, that God is trustworthy. In other words, they've learned the lesson of the wilderness wanderings, that God can be trusted. If God says we're going to go, we're going to go in. There's no problem. I don't care how big the guys are, how powerful they look. Remember what he did to Egypt. It's no hassle. But of course, democracy, being what democracy is, the masses, their voices heard, and the nation listened to the 10 spies. And they are judged by God for doing that. In other words, for not trusting His word. In chapter 14. And God says that not one of that generation, bar Caleb and Joshua, is going to enter the land. Even Moses is barred from the land, as we looked at earlier, because he disobeys God Himself, trusting the stick rather than the word. Numbers 20 through to 21, chapter 20, 22 to 21, 35 describes their journey. So there we go, 20, 22 to 21 describes their journey to the plains of Moab. During this time, God sent snakes among the people because of their rebellion against Him and against Moses. The judgment, as always, is followed by mercy, as God offers salvation to them through a bronze serpent, remember, up on a pole. And Jesus echoes that later on. People can look to the snake and be healed of their snake bite, even though they deserve to die by the snake bite. And so they wander around, that whole generation, wander around the promised land until they all literally die out. Numbers 22, they arrive on the plains of Moab, right next to the Jordan River, across from Canaan. And they stay there all the time, from Numbers 22 all the way through to Deuteronomy 34. It's a huge section of the Bible. They camped on the plains of Moab. And Moses is preaching sermon after sermon to them. And that's what Deuteronomy is. 3 great speeches, 3 great sermons that Moses preaches to the people before they cross and before he dies. The first speech is the first 5 chapters of Deuteronomy. He reminds them of God's promises and the consequence of that previous generation when they disobeyed God's word. The second speech is from chapter 5 all the way through to 26, and he teaches this new generation the law again. He taught it to the first generation at Sinai, and they didn't help them. And now the next generation needs to be taught the same thing. So Moses goes through the whole law again the second time to this generation. And the word Deuteronomy actually means second law. Nomos is law. Deutero, second giving of the law. And they are urged not to be like the nations that they're going to go in. They must be distinct. The third sermon, the third speech, is from chapter 27, all the way to chapter 31. And again, it's the Leviticus 26 chapter being told to them again. Blessings for obedience, curses for disobedience. The consequences are very, very clear. The day you eat of it, you will die, God said to Adam and Eve. And he has the same thing. He's laying it out up front. He's completely upfront with them. The covenant is then renewed and restated, and again the people agreed to obey. They're going to keep it. They're going to do it this time, unlike their fathers. And the book of Deuteronomy ends with Moses' death and Joshua taking over the reins. Back in Numbers chapter 27, there's a very, very important prayer by Moses, where he prays that God will not, when he dies, that God will not leave this nation like sheep without a shepherd. And do you remember Jesus picks up on that? Do you remember? He says, I am the good shepherd. I am the answer to Moses' prayer. I mean, when you read the Bible, it looks like Joshua is raised up to be the answer, the shepherd of Israel, but he's not. There are only 2 shepherds in the Bible. One is Moses and one is Jesus. In fact, there are only 2 prophets in the Bible, with capital P, prophets, Moses and Jesus. You get other prophets in between that I call little p prophets, people who take what Moses said and apply it, and take what Moses said to the king and challenge him, and take what Moses said to the people and demand repentance, and take what Moses said. They're always taking what Moses said until Jesus comes. And remember what Jesus says? Do you remember? Moses said that, but I say this. In other words, his word is not only equal to Moses' word, it actually supersedes Moses' word. So really, there's only 2 great prophets bringing revelation from God to the world, and that's Moses and Jesus. Fresh revelation that you would never have found anywhere else. Moses and Jesus. By the end of Deuteronomy then, God's nation is on the edge of the promised land. Remember our land blessing as you live under God's rule. They've been given their rule to obey. They know what to do. Moses has instructed them in Deuteronomy. They know that if they do it, they will enjoy Eden-like blessings. They know that if they don't, they will be scattered like the people at Babel. They will suffer God's judgment on them. Just as we finish off then, very quickly, how does the New Testament pick up on this whole section of the Bible? Very quickly. The name of God, I am who I am, or I will be who I am, is picked up by Jesus over and over and over again. All his I am sayings, he's taking the Jews' minds back to that burning bush. When God first introduced himself to Moses as I am. And Jesus keeps saying, I am the good shepherd. I am the vine. I am the gate. I am, help me as someone. All that, I think there's seven of them. The way, the truth, the life. I am the light of the world. He's making a very direct and blatant claim to be the God who was talking out of that bush. He's saying, I introduced myself to Moses as I am, and now I'm introducing myself to you as I am. I am the same God. I was there at the bush, and now I'm here with you. And they pick up stones to try and kill him for saying that. Constantly says, I am, I am. They keep saying to him, remember, at his trial, are you the king of the Jews? And he says, I am. Again, another pointed, claim to be God. The God who rescued the Israelites has come to rescue the world this time. Have I got them? Yes, I've got the sayings here. There they are. Quick slide. The bread of life, the light of the world, the gate for the sheep, the good shepherd, the resurrection and the life, the way, the truth and the life, and the true vine. I am, I am, I am, says Jesus. Secondly, Revelation 8, I've said this already, picks up those plagues again. The same plagues of Egypt are picked up in Revelation 8. Again, saying that they are the many judgments, the curtain raisers for the big event that's coming. Those many plagues were meant to warn Pharaoh that something big was brewing. And our many plagues, and we'll look at that when we get to Revelation, are meant to warn us that something big is brewing. Thirdly, 2 Corinthians 5 says that Jesus is the true Passover lamb. So that Passover lamb back in Egypt wasn't a real one. It was a picture of the real one, which is Jesus Christ himself. And interestingly, when did Jesus actually die? At the Passover. At the time they were slaughtering the lambs on Good Friday, before the Sabbath on Saturday, they killed Jesus at the same time. He died with the Passover lambs as the Passover lamb. All the journeying around that we read in this section of the Bible that is so common is picked up in Hebrews chapter 3 and 4 and 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Looks back at those journeys. And remember, when the people are journeying, what are they doing? Complaining, moaning, testing God. And Hebrews and Paul in Corinthians warns us not to do the same. Do not test your Father the way do not test God the way your forefathers tested him in the desert. Don't do it. We are on this journey. We are also journeying from here, from this world to the promised land. Make sure you're not like them. Not so much not complaining. The problem is complaining shows a much deeper problem. Complaining shows distrust and dissatisfaction with your Father. That's why coveting is such a bad sin. You really, when you covet something, you're saying that God doesn't love you, because if he did, he would give me that Ferrari. So you're accusing him, imagine, accusing him of not loving you when you covet something else and providing what you really need. Yeah. You're saying he's a bad father, which is what the Israelites are doing. Romans 3 picks up the law, the giving of the law, and says that the law was given to expose sin. The law was given in order to bring sin to the surface. It's Romans language, Romans 3 language. It is a schoolmaster there to drive us to Christ. The law is there to lead us to Christ, who can actually deal with the law. Can't help us. The law can just accuse us. And once you've agreed that the law is right and that I'm condemned, the law can't help you anymore. It served its purpose. It leaves you wallowing in your guilt. But it's actually, it's meant to drive you to Christ, where you go to the Passover lamb to have that sin removed. The whole of the New Testament, actually, mostly Hebrews, brings up tabernacles and priests and sacrifices, and showing that they're always fulfilled in Christ. He fulfills every single detail of every single element that God gives Moses to build in that tabernacle. They're all pointing to Christ. He is the tabernacle, our meeting place between God and man. He is our priest. He is our sacrifice. Only his sacrifice pleases God. The sacrifice of bulls and goats never ever pleased God. So Hebrews says that the first covenant is made obsolete by Jesus. He came, he fulfilled it, he replaced it with the new covenant of blood, of his own blood. John, there's only two more. John chapter 3, verse 14, picks up the bronze snake idea and says that that was a means of salvation for sinners in the Old Testament. And just as the snake was lifted up in the desert, so Christ has been lifted up for us. And when we turn our eyes to Christ, not just superstitiously, but when we trust that what happened to him was for my good, well, we too are saved from what we deserve, like the people in the desert. I take it in the desert, you could have lifted your eyes to the snake, and if you hadn't have trusted, if you sort of treated the bronze snake as a good luck omen, you wouldn't have been healed. It required faith. It was ideal that you'd look at the snake and trust that what God had said would happen, that the venom would not kill you. And then if you trusted him, well, you took him at his word. So Christ has been lifted up for us. Lastly, when Moses prayed for that shepherd for God's people to replace him, he was talking about Jesus. Jesus came to be that shepherd in John 11, I am the good shepherd. They asked Jesus in John chapter 1, are you not a prophet? Very interesting, isn't it? They don't say to him, are you a prophet, Jesus? To John the Baptist, sorry. Are you a prophet, John? They don't say that. They say, are you the prophet? Why? Because they were waiting for the prophet that Moses had asked for in Deuteronomy 18. Another prophet like me. He asked for another shepherd and another prophet. And they're looking around and think maybe John the Baptist is this prophet that is going to lead us out of our Egyptian slavery scenario to the Romans. Maybe you, John the Baptist. And he says, no, I'm not, but I know the prophet. The prophet is on his way. He feeds the 5,000. And at that point, they say, that's right, after the feeding of the 5,000, they say, surely this is the prophet who was to come into the world. Talking about Moses, Deuteronomy 18 prophet that Moses had prayed for. Well, let's leave it there. It's 8 o'clock on the nose, so we won't do any of the Bible handling stuff, which is fine. But sometimes it'll work like that. But any quick questions? 1 minute for questions.
It's about, we taking on Christ's righteousness. So he lived a completely righteous life. And so he fulfilled all of the law. I mean, did he fulfill all this law that you're talking about here, by the letter? Or how is he completely righteous?
Yeah. I think that the Pharisees tried to keep the letter of the law. So they made the law into a series of check boxes. And as long as you could tick the box, they thought you were fine with God. They couldn't have been further from the truth, of course, because Jesus says that they are children of the devil. Your father is Satan. So it is not being able to, by not eating pork, therefore I am acceptable to God. By not working on the Sabbath, that makes me God's friend. No, it's got nothing to do with friendship with God. That's got to do actually with the opposite of friendship with God. That obedience becomes a substitute for love. That loving God is too much of a hassle. And really, he's a bit of a, he cramps my style. So instead of loving him, I know what I'll do. I'll just tick off the law. And that becomes my means of forcing his hand to let me into heaven. So it's not the letter of the law, is it? David goes and breaks the letter of the law very clearly. He goes and eats the consecrated bread. Do you remember? And he breaks the Sabbath laws all the time. But he understood the heart behind it. He understood God's heart. And he understood the spirit in which that law had been given. The law is there to help you be friends with God. Really, it was there to regulate life in Israel so that they could live harmoniously together. So yeah, you might be able to tick off all the boxes, but you couldn't give 2 hoots for God. That's not going to help you at all. And likewise, you could be the thief on the cross who doesn't give 2 hoots for the law, but actually turns out loving Jesus. And actually loving God, remember, and loving your neighbor fulfills the law. You don't have to worry about what the laws are if you can do those 2, actually.
So how does that apply to Christ? I mean, why did he get baptized?
His baptism, are these questions coming through, Shan? They might be. Yeah. So his baptism was not for his sins, obviously.
No, obviously.
Baptism came about during the period between the Old and the New Testament. The Jews started baptizing non-Jews into Israel. If you wanted to become part of Israel, there were a couple of things you had to do. You had to be circumcised if you were a male, and you had to be baptized. It was something they brought in. And John the Baptist arrives, and he starts baptizing, which was not unusual, but he starts baptizing Jews. And the Pharisees are saying, but why is he doing that? They're already part of Israel. And his point is, no, they're not. They might have Abraham's blood in them. That doesn't make you a child of God. You need faith. You need to actually confess your sins. You need the sign of repentance, that you've repented and been washed clean, and you trust in God to forgive your sins. Then you become part of Israel, the true Israel, not national Israel, but God's chosen family. Now when Jesus comes along, he's baptized to identify with sinners. Sinners, truly contrite, repentant sinners who are serious about their sin, came to John and said, baptize us. We confess we need a wash. And of course the outside wash is a symbol of an inside wash that only God can give. We need a wash. We confess we have broken God's laws. And Jesus comes to identify with sinners, to say, it's for those sort of people. I've come to live amongst them. I've come to take their sin on myself. But it's not for his own sin at all.
It's the heart and not the letter.
Exactly. You don't even need to know the letter if the heart is right. Yeah. John.
Is there time for one more?
Last one.
There's that scripture that refers to Christ being tempted in every way. So he can identify with sinners being washed.
Yeah.
And he can identify with our weaknesses and temptation. And yet Christ is God. So he abhors sin. So there's that side to his character that just can't even get it. It's not even part, it's not on his radar, if I put it that way. So it's quite interesting as a human to think of Christ separate from his Father, because he's man, and yet he is God. So his perfection is, he just is perfect because he is God. But I think it's interesting, I think Craig's question is interesting also because we see him in both. We see him in our image as a human with flesh on, tempted in every way, and yet he lives
without sin.
So
in other words, it's not a sin to be tempted. He was tempted but never sinned. So Spurgeon, famous English preacher of the 1800s, he said, you can't stop a crow flying over your head, but you can stop a crow making a nest in your hair. So you can't help it, you're going to open a book and there's something that you shouldn't be looking at. You're going to stumble over stuff the whole time. You're going to be tempted all the time, but you don't have to take it up. That's Spurgeon's point. And that's Jesus as well. He resisted the temptation. He just battered it. Satan, the prince of lies comes to tempt him. In the most powerful way you can think of, Jesus just bats him, So being tempted is not the problem. It's following up on that temptation. And of course, Tim Keller will tell you, because when Jesus was tempted in every single way, well, how could he be tempted in ways that only women can be tempted in? If there are such ways, you have to tell me if there are, that men can't be tempted. But you know what I mean? Was he tempted in every single way that every single human being who ever lived? He was never tempted to buy an iPhone when he couldn't afford it, because there were no, you know what I'm saying? But Tim Keller will tell you that the biggest temptation is that the temptation behind our temptations. The temptation to be dissatisfied with God, that God is not enough, and that will lead to all sorts of other temptations. If your Father is enough, you won't covet, you won't murder, you won't. Exactly. And so in that way, he was tempted, which then covers everything. because he was tempted to think his father was not enough and that his father wouldn't rescue him. Remember, even in the garden, that was probably his greatest temptation, his greatest hour. Sweating blood. Lord, if any way this can be taken from me, please take it, but not my will. Yeah. Great. Well, let's call it quits there. Thanks for being online, for those who still are, and for those who are going to watch it later. Well, you would have watched it by the time you hear these words. Hope you enjoyed it as well. Hope it was beneficial to opening up these rather mysterious closed books of the Old Testament. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks, Andy.